3 disturbing true hotel room horror stories. There's something uniquely terrifying about hotel rooms. These temporary spaces, occupied by countless strangers before you, hold secrets within their walls. Tonight, I'm sharing 3 deeply disturbing true stories that will make you think twice before booking your next stay. These aren't urban legends or campfire tales. These are real experiences from real people who checked into what they thought would be ordinary hotel rooms, only to discover that some places never let you truly check out. Before we begin, if you enjoy true horror stories that will keep you up at night, make sure to subscribe to Dark Whispers and hit that notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming to this channel. Now turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let's dive into our first story. Story 1. The Room That Watched Back. Sarah Mitchell was a pharmaceutical sales representative who spent roughly 200 nights a year in hotel rooms across the country. After 7 years on the road, she'd seen it all, or so she thought. Hotels had become her second home, a monotonous rotation of identical beige walls and generic artwork. She had her routine down to a science. Check in, inspect the room for cleanliness, set up her laptop, and settle in for another night of emails and room service. It was a rainy Tuesday evening in October 2019 when Sarah checked into the Riverside Inn in a small town outside of Portland, Oregon. She'd never stayed there before, but it had decent reviews online and was conveniently located near her morning appointment. The hotel was an older building, probably from the 1970s, with that distinct musty smell that no amount of air freshener could quite mask. The lobby was dimly lit, decorated with faded photographs of the town's logging history and a dusty artificial plant that had seen better days. The clerk at the front desk was a young man, probably in his early 20s, with an anxious demeanor that immediately struck Sarah as odd. When she requested a room on a higher floor, as was her habit, he hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Actually, we only have one room available tonight," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Room 217. It's on the second floor." "That's fine," Sarah replied, tired from the long drive and eager to get to her room. The clerk's hand trembled slightly as he handed her the key card. "If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call the front desk. We're available 24/7. Sarah found the comment strange but attributed it to overeager customer service. She made her way to the second floor, dragging her wheeled suitcase behind her. The hallway was unusually long and narrow, with flickering fluorescent lights that hummed incessantly. The carpet was worn, with dark stains that Sarah preferred not to think about too closely. Room 217 was at the very end of the hallway, the last door on the left. Sarah swiped her key card and pushed open the heavy door. The room was larger than she expected, with a king-sized bed, a desk, and a small sitting area near the window. Everything appeared normal, perhaps a bit dated, but clean enough. She performed her usual inspection, checking the bathroom, looking under the bed, and examining the closet. Nothing seemed amiss. After unpacking her essentials, Sarah ordered dinner from a nearby Chinese restaurant and settled in to catch up on work. She was deep into a spreadsheet when she heard it. A faint scratching sound, like fingernails on wood, coming from somewhere within the room. She paused, listening intently. The sound stopped. Sarah shook her head, chalking it up to the old building settling or perhaps mice in the walls. She returned to her laptop, but the uneasy feeling persisted. It was then that she noticed something odd about the room's layout. The closet seemed unusually shallow, and there was a strange discrepancy in the room's dimensions. From the hallway, the room had appeared much longer, but standing inside, it felt as though several feet of space were missing. Sarah walked over to the closet and opened it again, this time examining it more carefully. The back wall was made of cheap pressboard, unlike the rest of the room's construction. She knocked on it and the sound was hollow. Her heart rate quickened. There was definitely a space behind that wall. She tried to dismiss her growing paranoia. Old hotels often had strange layouts, renovations that didn't quite make sense, sealed-off spaces that were no longer used. But something felt deeply wrong. Sarah pulled out her phone and began searching for information about the Riverside Inn. What she found made her blood run cold. 3 years earlier, a young woman named Emily Patterson had disappeared from this very hotel. She'd been on a cross-country trip, documenting her journey on social media. Her last post had been a photo of a hotel room, captioned, "One more night on the road." The next day she never checked out and her car remained in the parking lot. Her room was searched and all her belongings were still there, but Emily was gone. The case remained unsolved. Sarah's hands were shaking as she continued reading. She found a Reddit thread dedicated to the case, where amateur detectives had pieced together disturbing details. Emily had stayed in room 217. Several commenters mentioned that the hotel had a dark history, with rumors of hidden spaces and surveillance equipment found in rooms years ago, though these claims were always dismissed by management. The scratching sound returned, louder this time, definitely coming from behind the closet wall. Sarah's rational mind told her to call the front desk, but something more primal told her to get out of that room immediately. She quickly began throwing her belongings back into her suitcase, her eyes constantly darting to the closet. That's when she noticed the small, almost imperceptible hole in the pressboard at the back of the closet, about eye level. It was barely visible, covered partially by the hanging rod, but once she saw it, she couldn't look away. She grabbed her phone, turned on the flashlight, and cautiously approached the closet. With a trembling hand, she shined the light toward the hole. What she saw in that brief moment would haunt her for the rest of her life. Another eye, bloodshot and wide with terror, staring back at her from the darkness behind the wall. Sarah screamed and stumbled backward, her phone clattering to the floor. She grabbed her purse and ran for the door, not bothering with her suitcase. As she fumbled with the door handle, she heard something that stopped her heart. A woman's voice, muffled and desperate, coming from behind the closet wall. "Help me, please. He keeps me in here." Sarah threw open the door and ran down the hallway, her screams echoing off the walls. She burst into the lobby, hysterical, trying to explain what she'd seen to the night clerk, who now looked utterly panicked. She called 911, her voice shaking so badly she could barely speak. The police arrived within minutes. What they found behind the false wall in room 217 would make national headlines. There was indeed a hidden space, accessible through a concealed door in the maintenance corridor, about 4 feet wide and 8 feet long. Inside, they found evidence that someone had been living in that space, coming and going, blankets, food wrappers, magazines, and most disturbing of all, hundreds of photographs of hotel guests, taken through the peephole as they slept, changed clothes, and went about their private activities. But they didn't find anyone there that night. Not behind the wall, and not the eye that Sarah had seen. The hotel's maintenance supervisor, a man named Donald Craig, who'd worked there for 15 years, disappeared that same night. His apartment was searched, and police found extensive journals detailing his activities, his observations of guests, and his obsessions with certain women who'd stayed at the hotel. Among his belongings, they found Emily Patterson's driver's license and jewelry. Emily's body was discovered 3 days later, buried in a wooded area 15 miles from the hotel. She'd been dead for 3 years. The medical examiner determined she'd been held captive for approximately 2 weeks before her death. Donald Craig was never found. He remains on the FBI's most wanted list to this day. But here's what still keeps Sarah awake at night. Whose eye had she seen staring back at her? Emily had been dead for 3 years. The police found no one in that hidden space. Some officers theorized that Craig himself had been watching her, that he'd escaped through the maintenance corridor before police arrived. But Sarah knows what she saw. That eye wasn't the eye of a middle-aged man. It was the eye of a terrified woman. Was there another victim, someone who managed to escape in the chaos? Or had Sarah seen something that couldn't be rationally explained, a residual presence of Emily's final, desperate moments? The Riverside Inn was shut down permanently. Sarah quit her job and hasn't stayed in a hotel room since. She still receives calls from investigators occasionally, hoping she might remember some detail that could crack the case of Donald Craig's whereabouts. But the only detail she can't forget, no matter how hard she tries, is that eye, staring back at her through the darkness, filled with unspeakable terror. And sometimes, late at night in her own home, Sarah swears she can still hear it. That faint scratching sound like fingernails on wood, coming from behind her bedroom wall. Story 2. The Guest Who Never Left. Marcus Webb was celebrating his 10th wedding anniversary with his wife, Jennifer, in July 2021. They'd planned a romantic weekend getaway to Savannah, Georgia, a city they'd always wanted to visit. Marcus had saved for months to make this trip special. He'd booked a room at the Grand Monarch Hotel, a historic property in the heart of the city's famous historic district, known for its antebellum architecture and southern charm. The hotel was stunning, a beautifully restored building from 1847, with towering white columns, ornate ironwork, and lush gardens. The kind of place that appeared in travel magazines and Instagram feeds. Marcus and Jennifer checked in on Friday afternoon, greeted by a smiling concierge who provided them with recommendations for restaurants and ghost tours, Savannah being famous for its haunted history. Their room, 412, was elegant and spacious, with high ceilings, a crystal chandelier, and a large four-poster bed. French doors opened onto a small balcony overlooking the courtyard garden. Everything was perfect, exactly what Marcus had hoped for. The first night was wonderful. They had dinner at a renowned restaurant on River Street, took a moonlit walk along the waterfront, and returned to their room around midnight, tipsy on wine and nostalgia, reminiscing about their wedding day a decade earlier. They fell asleep in each other's arms, the gentle sound of the courtyard fountain drifting through the open balcony doors. Marcus woke suddenly at 3:47 a.m. He was certain of the time because the antique clock on the mantel, illuminated by moonlight, was directly in his line of sight. Something had pulled him from sleep, some sound or sensation that his unconscious mind had registered as wrong. The room was cold, unusually cold for a July night in Georgia. He could see his breath. Jennifer was still asleep beside him, and he didn't want to wake her, so he carefully slid out of bed to check if the air conditioning had malfunctioned. As his feet touched the floor, he froze. Someone was standing on their balcony. Through the sheer curtains covering the French doors, Marcus could see the silhouette of a person, perfectly still, facing into their room. His first thought was that it was an intruder, someone who'd climbed up from the courtyard. His heart pounding, Marcus looked around for something to defend himself with. He grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the desk and slowly approached the balcony doors. "Who's there?" he called out, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I'm calling the police." The figure didn't move or respond. Marcus flipped on the light switch, flooding the room with harsh illumination. Jennifer stirred but didn't wake. With the lights on, Marcus could see the figure more clearly through the curtains. A woman in a long, old-fashioned dress, her hair pinned up in a style from another era. She was still completely motionless. Marcus yanked open the French doors, ready to confront the intruder. The balcony was empty. Completely empty. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to go. The balcony was 20 feet off the ground, with no trellis or ladder nearby. Yet, just seconds before, he'd clearly seen someone standing there. He stepped out onto the balcony, looking in all directions. The courtyard below was silent and deserted. The adjacent balconies were empty. He looked up, wondering if someone could have climbed to the floor above, but the building's facade was smooth stone, impossible to scale. "Marcus? What's wrong?" Jennifer had woken up and was standing in the doorway, wrapped in the bedsheet. "There was someone on our balcony," Marcus said, his voice uncertain now. "I saw them. A woman." Jennifer stepped out beside him, shivering in the sudden cold. "There's no one here, baby. Maybe you had a nightmare?" Marcus wanted to believe that, but he knew what he'd seen. They went back inside, locked the balcony doors, and closed the curtains. The room gradually warmed back to a normal temperature. Jennifer fell back asleep quickly, but Marcus lay awake until dawn, listening to every creak and whisper of the old building. The next morning, he convinced himself it had been a dream, a trick of the light and shadow. They spent Saturday exploring the city, taking a tour of Forsyth Park, browsing the antique shops, and enjoying the vibrant culture. By evening, the incident had faded to the back of Marcus's mind. That night, they returned to their room around 11, tired but happy. Jennifer took a bath while Marcus flipped through the hotel's information binder, reading about the building's history. That's when he found the page about room 412. The entry was brief, almost deliberately vague, mentioning that the room had historical significance and had been carefully restored to maintain its original character. There was a black and white photograph of the room from the 1920s, looking remarkably similar to its current state. But what caught Marcus's attention was a small note at the bottom of the page. For more information about the Grand Monarch's fascinating history, including the story of the Lady of Room 412, please inquire at the front desk. The Lady of Room 412. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Jennifer emerged from the bathroom in her pajamas, and Marcus showed her the entry. They debated whether to call the front desk but decided against it, not wanting to seem paranoid or superstitious. Instead, Marcus pulled out his phone and began searching online for information about the hotel. What he found was deeply unsettling. The Grand Monarch Hotel had a well-documented haunting, though the hotel downplayed it in their official materials. In 1873, a young woman named Catherine Ashford had been staying in room 412 with her new husband, a wealthy merchant. On their wedding night, her husband had gone downstairs to smoke a cigar in the courtyard. When he returned an hour later, he found Catherine dead, hanging from the chandelier. The official cause of death was ruled suicide, but there were whispers of foul play, suggestions that the husband had discovered Catherine's affair with another man and had murdered her in a rage, staging it to look like suicide. He was never charged, and the case was quickly buried by his family's influence and money. Since then, guests in room 412 had reported strange occurrences. A woman's figure on the balcony, the smell of perfume, objects moving on their own, and an overwhelming sense of sadness and dread that permeated the room in the early morning hours. Some guests reported waking to find a woman standing at the foot of their bed, staring at them with hollow, accusing eyes. The hotel had tried to rebrand the haunting as a charming historical quirk, even offering ghost packages for thrill seekers. But Marcus found forums where former guests described experiences that were anything but charming. Several people reported physical phenomena, being touched by invisible hands, having the sheets pulled off their beds, and hearing a woman's voice whispering in their ears. One couple checked out in the middle of the night after the wife woke up to find bruises around her neck, as if someone had tried to strangle her. "Marcus, stop reading that stuff," Jennifer said, noticing his pale expression. "You're going to freak yourself out." But it was too late. Marcus was already freaked out. He couldn't stop thinking about the figure he'd seen on the balcony the night before. Had it been Catherine Ashford? Was she still here, trapped in this room, endlessly reliving her final moments? They decided to leave the lights on and try to get some sleep. Jennifer dozed off relatively quickly, but Marcus remained awake, hyper-aware of every sound. Around 2 a.m. he heard it, the soft click of the French doors unlocking. He watched in frozen terror as the doors slowly swung open, admitting a rush of frigid air. The same figure he'd seen the night before stood on the balcony, but now she was facing away, looking out over the courtyard. Marcus couldn't move, couldn't speak. The figure began to turn, slowly, and Marcus realized with horror that he didn't want to see her face, didn't want to know what she looked like. But he couldn't look away. As she turned, Marcus saw that she wasn't quite solid. He could see through her, could see the courtyard and the fountain beyond. Her face was young and beautiful, but twisted with anguish. Her eyes, when they met his, were filled with such profound sadness that Marcus felt tears streaming down his own face. Catherine, if that's who she was, raised one translucent hand and pointed at him, then at Jennifer sleeping beside him. Her mouth moved, forming words that Marcus couldn't hear but somehow understood. "Don't let him hurt you." Then she stepped backward off the balcony and vanished. Marcus screamed, waking Jennifer. He ran to the balcony and looked down, expecting to see a body, but there was nothing. The courtyard was empty and silent. Jennifer, terrified by her husband's hysteria, called the front desk. The night manager came up to their room and Marcus, shaking and crying, explained what he'd seen. The manager's expression shifted from concern to carefully neutral. "Sir, I think you may have had a nightmare. This is a very old building, and sometimes guests experience vivid dreams." "I wasn't dreaming," Marcus insisted. "There was a woman on our balcony. She jumped. I saw her." The manager promised to review the security footage and suggested they might be more comfortable in a different room. Marcus and Jennifer hurriedly packed their belongings and moved to room 203 on the opposite side of the hotel. Neither of them slept for the rest of the night. The next morning they checked out early, cutting their anniversary trip short. The front desk manager, different from the night manager, was apologetic and offered them a full refund and a complimentary future stay. Marcus noticed a look exchange between the manager and the concierge, a knowing glance that suggested this wasn't the first time guests had fled room 412 in the middle of the night. On the drive home, Jennifer tried to rationalize what Marcus had experienced. Maybe it was the power of suggestion, maybe the wine, maybe a combination of stress and an overactive imagination. But Marcus knew what he'd seen. He'd looked into Catherine Ashford's eyes, felt her sadness, heard her warning. Don't let him hurt you. 3 months later, Jennifer filed for divorce. During the proceedings, she revealed that Marcus had been having an affair for over a year with a co-worker. She'd known for months but had hoped the anniversary trip would help them reconnect, would remind Marcus of what they'd once had. Instead, it had confirmed her decision to leave. Marcus was devastated, begging Jennifer to reconsider. But she was resolute. She told him something that made his blood run cold. That last night in Savannah, I woke up when you screamed, but I was awake before that. I felt someone sitting on the edge of the bed and I opened my eyes just a little. I saw her, Marcus. I saw the woman in the old dress. She was sitting beside me, stroking my hair so gently, like a mother comforting a child. And I heard her voice clear as day, "You deserve better. Don't let him hurt you." Jennifer had never told Marcus this, afraid he'd think she was crazy or worse, that he'd dismiss her experience. But Catherine Ashford had reached across the veil between life and death to deliver a message, to protect a woman from the same kind of pain she'd endured over a century ago. The divorce was finalized in March 2022. Jennifer remarried 2 years later to a man who treats her with kindness and respect. She says she's never been happier. Marcus still thinks about that night in room 412, about Catherine's warning. He's tried to move on, tried to convince himself it was all just coincidence, but he can't shake the feeling that something supernatural intervened in his life, that a ghost saved his wife from years of unhappiness. The Grand Monarch Hotel still operates, and room 412 is still available for booking. The hotel's website now openly advertises it as their most haunted room, attracting paranormal enthusiasts from around the world. But the hotel doesn't mention the warning that Catherine Ashford delivers to certain guests, the ones she senses need her protection. And sometimes, late at night, hotel staff passing by room 412 can hear a woman crying, soft and endless, mourning not just her own tragic fate, but all the betrayals and heartbreaks that have echoed through that room across the decades. Story 3. The Convention That Never Ended. David Park was an IT professional who attended cybersecurity conferences several times a year. In March 2022, he traveled to Las Vegas for Cybersecure Summit, one of the industry's largest gatherings. He'd been to Vegas dozens of times and had stayed at most of the major hotels on the Strip. For this trip, he booked a room at the Pyramid Lux Hotel, a massive complex known for its Egyptian theme and labyrinthine layout. David checked in on a Wednesday afternoon, planning to stay through Saturday. The hotel was enormous, with over 4,000 rooms spread across multiple towers. The convention center where the conference was being held was connected to the hotel through a series of pedestrian bridges and underground tunnels, designed to keep attendees insulated from the desert heat. His room, 2847, was standard for Vegas. A decent-sized bed, a small bathroom, a desk, and a window overlooking the city. Nothing remarkable, nothing that would suggest what was about to happen. David unpacked, changed into business casual attire, and headed down to the conference to register and attend the opening reception. The reception was held in one of the hotel's many ballrooms, packed with hundreds of IT professionals networking and enjoying free food and drinks. David knew several people from previous conferences and spent the evening catching up with colleagues and making new contacts. The event wrapped up around 9 p.m., and David, tired from his flight and the social interaction, decided to call it an early night. He took the elevator up to the 28th floor and walked down the hallway to his room. He swiped his key card, entered, and immediately sensed something was off. The room looked slightly different. The bedspread wasn't quite the same color, and there was a different painting on the wall. David stepped back out and checked the room number, 2847. That was correct. He went back inside, thinking maybe he'd just misremembered the room's details. It had been a long day. He got ready for bed, set his alarm for 7 a.m., and fell asleep almost immediately. The alarm woke him on schedule. David showered, dressed, and headed down to the conference. He attended sessions throughout the day, grabbed lunch in one of the hotel's many restaurants, and returned to his room around 6 p.m. to change for the evening's networking dinner. When he opened the door to room 2847, he stopped in confusion. This definitely wasn't his room. The layout was the same, but everything else was different. The furniture was a completely different style, the curtains were a different color, and all of his belongings were gone. His suitcase, his laptop, his clothes, everything had disappeared. David's first thought was that he'd been robbed. But this didn't look like a robbery. This looked like a completely different room. He checked the room number again, 2847. He pulled out his key card and checked it. Room 2847, Tower B, 28th floor. He went back down to the front desk, frustrated and confused. The clerk looked up his reservation. "Mr. Park, you're in room 2847 in Tower B. Is there a problem with your room?" "All my stuff is gone," David explained. "And the room looks completely different from when I left this morning." The clerk's brow furrowed. She typed on her computer, then made a phone call. After a brief conversation, she hung up and looked at David with concern. "Sir, security is going to escort you to your room to investigate. There's no record of any maintenance or housekeeping entering your room today. Your key card hasn't been used since you left this morning." Two security officers accompanied David back to room 2847. They opened the door and David immediately said, "See? This isn't how my room looked." But the security officers exchanged glances. "Sir, what do you mean? Can you describe what's different?" David looked around, trying to articulate what felt wrong. The room was similar but not identical. The carpet pattern was slightly different. The bathroom had different fixtures. The view from the window seemed to be from a slightly different angle. "My stuff," David said, his voice rising. "Where's my suitcase? My laptop?" They searched the room thoroughly. The closet was empty. The drawers were empty. The bathroom had the hotel's standard toiletries, but none of David's personal items. It was as if he'd never been there at all. "Mr. Park, are you certain you're in the right tower? The Pyramid Lux has 3 towers, and they all have similar room numbering," one of the security officers suggested. David was certain, but now doubt crept in. This hotel was massive and confusing. Maybe he'd somehow gotten turned around? The security officers escorted him to towers A and C, checking room 2847 in each. Both rooms were occupied by other guests. Back at the front desk, the clerk reviewed David's check-in information. "Mr. Park, according to our records, you checked into room 2847, Tower B, yesterday at 2:37 p.m. Your key card was used to enter the room at 2:45 p.m. and again at 8:47 p.m. You exited at 7:12 a.m. this morning, and then entered again at 6:03 p.m., which is when you discovered your belongings missing." "That's right," David confirmed. "But, sir," the clerk said carefully, "there's no record of you calling the front desk last night about any issue with the room. And housekeeping reported that when they serviced your room this morning, all of your belongings were there." "Then where are they now?" David demanded. The hotel manager was called. She reviewed the security footage from the 28th floor hallway. The video showed David entering and exiting room 2847 that morning, but there was no footage of anyone entering the room after he left. No housekeeping, no other guests, no one. "This doesn't make sense," the manager admitted. "Let's check the room one more time." They returned to room 2847, and this time they conducted an extensive search, looking in places David hadn't thought to check. Behind the TV stand they found something odd, a laptop bag but not David's. It was an older model, dusty, and when they opened it, it contained a laptop that was several years out of date. The manager's face went pale. She made a phone call, speaking in hushed tones. When she hung up, she turned to David. "Mr. Park, I need to ask you some questions about the conference you're attending." "What's it called?" "Cybersecure Summit," David said. "It's happening right now in your convention center." The manager exchanged a worried look with security. "Sir, there's no conference by that name registered at our facility this week. We have a dental convention and a wedding expo, but no cybersecurity conference." David pulled out his phone to show her his conference registration email. But when he opened his email app, there was nothing there. The confirmation email was gone. He searched for cybersecure, and no results came up. Growing desperate, he went to the conference website on his phone browser. The page wouldn't load. "That's impossible," David said. "I was just there. I attended sessions all day. I talked to dozens of people." "Mr. Park, would you be willing to take us to where you think the conference is being held?" the manager asked. David led them through the hotel's maze of corridors, following the path he'd taken that morning to the conference. But when they arrived at what should have been the ballroom where the opening reception had been held, they found a storage area filled with stacked chairs and tables. The door had a thick layer of dust on the handle. "This isn't right," David insisted. "There were hundreds of people here last night. There was food, a bar, music." They walked to the convention center. The space that David was certain had been filled with vendor booths and presentation stages was empty, set up for the dental convention that wouldn't start until the following day. David felt reality slipping away from him. Had he imagined the entire conference? Was he having some kind of psychotic break? The hotel manager, now genuinely concerned for David's well-being, suggested he might want to see a doctor. But David refused. He was certain something else was happening, something that couldn't be explained by mental illness or confusion. He went back to room 2847, which the hotel had agreed to let him stay in despite the strangeness, and began searching online for any information about Cybersecure Summit. What he found made his blood run cold. There had been a Cybersecure Summit at the Pyramid Lux Hotel, but it had been in March 2019, exactly 3 years earlier. David found photos from the event, descriptions of the sessions, and as he scrolled through the attendee list, his heart stopped. His name was there. David Park, listed as a registered attendee. But David had never attended that conference. In March 2019, he'd been in a completely different city, working on a project that had kept him from traveling. He'd never been to that Cybersecure Summit. Confused and frightened, David kept searching. He found news articles from March 2019 about an incident at the Pyramid Lux Hotel. On the final night of the Cybersecure Summit, there had been a fire in Tower B on the 28th floor. The fire had been contained to a single room, room 2847. One person had died in that fire, a conference attendee who'd been overcome by smoke in his sleep. The victim's name was David Park. David stared at his phone, unable to process what he was reading. He looked up the David Park who died, finding an obituary, a LinkedIn profile, photos. The man in the photos looked similar to him, similar enough to maybe be mistaken for him from a distance, but they definitely weren't the same person. This David Park had been older, from a different state, worked for a different company. But they'd shared a name and they'd both been scheduled to attend the same conference. David's hands were shaking as he continued researching. He found conspiracy theories on Reddit, forum posts from other conference attendees who'd been at the Pyramid Lux that week in 2019. Several of them described strange experiences, seeing the same person in multiple places at once, attending sessions that weren't on the official schedule, encountering conference attendees who didn't appear in any photos or videos from the event. One post stood out: "Has anyone else noticed that some of us seem to have gotten stuck? I keep having dreams where I'm back at the Pyramid Lux, attending the same conference over and over. In the dreams, I can't leave the hotel. I try to check out, but I always end up back in my room. I think something happened to us that week, something that tied us to that place." The post was from March 2022, exactly when David was there now, exactly 3 years after the original conference. David tried to leave his room. He walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, but when the doors opened, he was still on the 28th floor. He tried the stairs, walking down flight after flight, but somehow always ended up back on the 28th floor. He tried to leave through different exits, but every path led him back to the same hallway, back to room 2847. As panic set in, David noticed something else. The hotel around him was changing. Subtly, gradually, things were shifting. The carpet pattern would be different each time he looked down. The art on the walls would change. Even the room numbers on the doors seemed to shift and rearrange themselves. He encountered other people in the hallways, but when he tried to speak to them, they didn't seem to hear him. Or worse, they'd respond, but their words didn't quite make sense, as if they were having a completely different conversation. David ran back to his room and locked himself inside. He called his wife, but the call wouldn't connect. He tried texting, but the messages wouldn't send. He opened his social media apps, but his feeds were frozen, showing posts from March 2019. That's when David understood. He hadn't traveled to Las Vegas in 2022. Somehow he'd slipped through time or reality, or whatever separated one moment from another, and ended up in March 2019, attending a conference he'd never registered for, trapped in a hotel room where another David Park had died. Or maybe it was worse than that. Maybe he died in that fire, along with the other David Park, and this was some kind of afterlife, a purgatory where he was doomed to relive those final days forever, checking into a hotel he could never leave. David tried everything to escape. He broke the window only to find that the 28th floor opened onto a wall of fog, with no ground visible below. He tried to force open the door to the hallway, but it led only to more hallways, endless corridors that twisted back on themselves. He tried to sleep, hoping he'd wake up in his real life, but sleep brought only nightmares of fire and smoke. Days passed, or what felt like days. David lost track of time. He'd see the sun rise and set through his window, but the clock in his room was frozen at 6:03 p.m., the exact time he'd first returned to find his belongings missing. He encountered other people who seemed trapped like him. In the elevator that never reached the lobby, he met a woman named Sandra who claimed she'd been at the hotel for a sales conference in 2017. She'd been trying to check out for what felt like years. In the hotel restaurant that served food he could never quite taste, he met a man named James who'd come to Vegas for his bachelor party in 2015 and never made it to his wedding. They were all stuck, all caught in some kind of temporal loop centered around the Pyramid Lux Hotel. David theorized that the building itself had become unstable, that something about its construction or location had created weak points in reality where people could slip through, becoming trapped in moments that endlessly repeated. But why? What had caused this? David researched the hotel's history as much as he could with his limited internet access, which seemed to only show him information from before his disappearance. He discovered that the Pyramid Lux had been built on the site of an older hotel that had burned down in 1971, killing 43 people. Before that, the land had been the location of a hospital that closed in the 1950s after multiple patients died under mysterious circumstances. The ground beneath the hotel seemed to be cursed, or at least unstable, soaked in tragedy and death. Each disaster added another layer to the trap, another group of souls caught in the building's gravitational pull. David made one final attempt to escape. He found other trapped people and together they tried to recreate the exact conditions of the fire that had killed the original David Park. They reasoned that if they could trigger the same event, maybe it would create an opening, a way back to their own timelines. They gathered in room 2847, the epicenter of the anomaly. As the clock approached 3:47 a.m., the time the fire had started in 2019, they waited, hoping for anything to happen. The room grew cold. The lights flickered. David felt reality bending around him, felt the walls becoming thin, transparent. For a moment, he could see through them into dozens of other versions of the same room, occupied by different people in different times, all trapped in their own loops. And then he saw himself. Not a reflection, but another David Park, the one who had died in the fire. The man looked at him with hollow, knowing eyes, and David understood. This wasn't about escaping. This was about accepting. They were all ghosts now, caught in the moment of their deaths or disappearances, forever replaying their final hours. The last thing David remembered was smoke, not from a fire, but smoke that seemed to rise from nowhere, filling the room, filling his lungs. And then darkness. Back in the real world, David Park's wife reported him missing when he failed to return from his Las Vegas trip in March 2022. The hotel had no record of his stay, no reservation, no key card activity. His credit card showed a charge from the Pyramid Lux on the day he claimed to have checked in, But hotel management insisted there must have been a processing error, that he'd never actually stayed there. His car was found in long-term parking at the airport, his return flight unused. Security footage showed him arriving at the airport and taking a shuttle, but the trail went cold after that. It was as if David Park had simply vanished into thin air. His case remains open and unsolved. His wife occasionally receives strange calls, just static and interference, but she swears she can hear his voice underneath, saying the same thing over and over: "I can't leave. I can't leave the hotel." The Pyramid Lux Hotel continues to operate, one of Las Vegas's most popular destinations. Thousands of guests check in and out every day without incident. But occasionally someone disappears. A guest who checked in never checks out, and when staff investigate, there's no record of them ever being there. Their rooms are empty, their belongings vanished as if they never existed at all. And in the hallways late at night, security guards report seeing people who don't quite look solid, guests in outdated clothing walking through walls, attending conferences that ended decades ago, forever trapped in a hotel where time has no meaning and checkout is impossible. If you ever find yourself at the Pyramid Lux Hotel in Las Vegas, pay attention to the room number when you check in. If they try to give you a room ending in 47, especially on the higher floors, especially in Tower B, ask for a different room. And if you wake up one morning to find your belongings missing and the room looking slightly different, don't try to investigate. Don't try to understand. Just run. Get out of the hotel as fast as you can, and pray that reality lets you leave. Because once the Pyramid Lux decides to keep you, you may be checking in forever. Closing. Those were 3 disturbing true hotel room horror stories that remind us that the places we think are safe, the temporary homes we rent for a night or a weekend, can harbor secrets far more terrifying than we could imagine. Sarah Mitchell discovered that someone had been watching her from within the walls. Marcus Webb encountered a ghost trying to save his marriage by revealing his betrayal. And David Park learned that some hotels don't just take your money, they take your entire existence, trapping you in a loop you can never escape. The next time you check into a hotel room, take an extra moment to inspect your surroundings. Look for inconsistencies in the walls, listen for sounds that don't belong, pay attention to that feeling of unease that your instincts are trying to tell you means danger. Trust your gut. And if something feels wrong, leave immediately. Don't worry about losing your deposit or seeming paranoid. Your safety, your sanity, and possibly your soul could depend on it. If you enjoyed these stories, please subscribe to Dark Whispers for more true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that like button, leave a comment telling me about your own disturbing hotel experiences, and share this video with someone who loves horror. We post new terrifying true stories every week, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Check out the links in the description for our social media, where I share bonus content and shorter horror stories throughout the week. And remember, the next time you're lying in a hotel bed, staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning, wondering what that sound was, you're not alone. You're never alone in a hotel room. Until next time, stay safe out there. This is Dark Whispers, reminding you that the scariest stories are the ones that really happened. Sweet dreams.